Alright, so this guide is gonna be a kind of a quick guide to Inscription, Kaycee's mod. I'm not gonna be talking about the base game at all, where you exit mod. And just note, because I don't want to spoil anything on the main game, that this mode unlocks after you beat the main game. So there's more to do, and this is basically a rehash of Act 1. So, Kaycee's mod is essentially broken down into two stages. The first stage is where you're trying to beat the individual challenges as they appear in order to unlock more content. So you'll be unlocking new cards that are not in the regular game. You'll be unlocking the rest of the starter decks, which we're going to cover very shortly. And you're going to unlock the devlog entries for each of the challenge levels that you beat. Essentially, each time you complete a run where you kill the 3 bosses and Leshy, you get a new set of challenges unlocked, and the price of those challenges goes up and up and up, and there's a maximum requirement that you have to meet in order to do that. So, as an example, showing you the challenges here, you can see the ones that I just don't like. Some of these challenges. I'll break these down in a minute though. But you start off with these 4 right here. You have to beat a run with these equipped, and then you unlock another tier, and then another tier, and another tier, and another tier, and another tier. When you finally beat all 12, you get the final boss change, which is really fun. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a really fun thing. So this game does offer a lot of replayability even after you beat base Kaycee's mod. That being said, if you're somebody like me and you think that there's a high replay value for Kaycee's mod, this is going to be kind of a quick guide on the decks, the challenges, and how to start a run. So the first thing I want to cover, I'm just going to show you this right away, is that you need to know how to avoid penalizing yourself. Now, most of the time, you're going to spawn with 2 pelts. And those 2 pelts you trade in immediately. If you surrender early, one of your pelts gets replaced with a possum. Now, most of the time that's not that great. There are some examples. The Mantis deck, the Curious Egg deck, and the Bone Collector deck, as I call it right here. These decks can actually benefit more from the possum. Whereas Gek deck, Ant deck, the Tribute deck, the Waterborne deck, they don't benefit from it. The starter deck, maybe. But I'll just pick the Bone deck real quick. So we'll pick the Bone deck. I have it beat, so I can put whatever challenges I want on. Which, these are my standard 2 challenges. These are the easiest 2 challenges in the game to beat. But you can put whatever set of challenges you want on. Let's just put this on, why not? So, if you notice at the top, you have R2 and you have Circle. This is important to note for when you go to pick. So, at the end of a run, whether you die, if you die before you beat Leshy, this prompt will appear. If you press the circle, it allows you to end your run with no penalty, no possum. If you hit R2, it'll reload everything. So it'll reload the same set of bosses, and it will reload the, it will also reload the same deck you chose. So if you want to switch decks or change up your challenges, you need to press circle at the main menu. But pick R2, and I'll show you a little trick. So this is just to give you a little heads up before we talk the nitty gritty on the starter decks and the challenges and how they shape out. It's not going to be anything big. I'm trying to keep this under 15 minutes. So just like in regular Inscription, you can get up, move around the room. You still have this right here. You still have the clock, which will give you some items. You still have the painting. You can do this 3 times to unlock some new items. Once you have all 3, it's going to look like this. You can still get in the safe. Can't really do anything to interact with this. This just changes what your actual character is. You can still interact with the Bone Lord. Press circle on PS4. Change your music. The key to this And this will not give you teeth like it will in the regular game. But yeah, you still get the same set of puzzles and everything. Still get 3 items. Well, for now. But let me show you one little thing on how kaycee's mod works. Immediately when you start the game, you will always get a trader right away. By the way, if you go up with the right analog stick, you can see your deck at any time except in a fight. This is an important note so you can see certain changes. Certain decks play completely different. So you see we have the 2 rabbit pelts right here. I'll just show you real quick. You get a trader to get rid of those 2 pelts. Your strategy for this is going to depend greatly on your deck or on what comes next. If you have a campfire or a sigil, you don't want to pick for cards for your deck. You want to pick other things. So like here, I have a bone collector deck. This deck would be terrible for me. I have no bone cards. I have no cards of real value here. So this is what you would call a scrub deck, where you're just trying to pick cards for their sigils, or you're trying to pick cards for value. Let's say I just picked Porcupine and Mole. Fuck it. I'm not going to go into the next stage. I just want to show you that. So, you know, if I were going to run a playthrough like this, these 2 generate cards. This has no sigil, so I'd be putting probably the Porcupine on the Coyote. And the Mole sigil, I don't know what the hell I'd do with that. Or maybe the Porcupine on the Mole, and find another sigil for Mr. Coyote later. So, you press options and you abandon your run at any time. We're going to reload this exact same thing. Instead of having the 2, see right here, if I press R2, I load up with a possum. If I press circle, no possum. Just a little distinction right there in case you are specifically wondering why you have a possum. Leshy doesn't like quitters, so remember that. So here, see I have the possum, and he's gonna shit talk you, right? As soon as we spawn in and run, and we press circle, and that kicks us out to the main menu. If you don't hit circle, you will be just continuing the same run until you beat it or inevitably press circle. So usually a rule of thumb for me is if you're about to get off, if you're about to quit, don't like leave and walk away. Just end your run and come back another time. So now let us talk about the challenges. We're going to rate the challenges, we're going to rate the starter deck cards, and I might do a quick overview of the cards you unlock, because I'm assuming by this point in the game, you've gotten comfortable with the basic cards of Inscription. So we'll start with the challenges first. Alright, so for your challenges, the 4 challenges that you start off with play very differently. The easiest of the bunch is Pricey Pelts. Trapper Pelts cost more. This is a very easy one to play under for the most part, because in this version of the game, your deck building matters a lot more because you're very constricted at the start as to what you get. And some of these decks require you to play a certain play style. So the pelts can often be more harm than good. This is a very easy mod to run. This can be just a quick 5 points in every single challenge that you run. There's no real reason to. It also doesn't affect the price of the knife that the trader uses. The trapper trader, the pelt knife. That will always cost 7 teeth. So you can reliably use that as a 7 teeth kill a card item. It's only the pelts that cost more. Some builds can turbo out pelts really quick, particularly if you have like a Mantis God build, a Hodag build, an Ouroboros build. Well, the Ouroboros is kind of shit in this mode compared to the regular mode, because it doesn't carry over from run to run. Each time you end a run, it resets. So you either have to spam Ouroboros immediately at the start of your run, or he's kind of useless. This is a very good one to run. The next challenging one to run is probably this one. The smaller backpack, I never run this because it's annoying. It's not difficult to beat, because you can clear some bosses with just 2 items. Most bosses you can clear with 2 items, unless you're doing some relatively dumb shit. So the smaller backpack really doesn't hurt you, it's just more inconvenient than anything else. If you're playing a pack rat strategy around the pack rat sigil a lot, this will be the bane of your existence. But if you're one of those players that is just constantly turboing through items and is always picking the backpack option, then this won't affect you. It's not bad by any means. It's not terrible. You can definitely win with this. It's just annoying. So next up is no hook. This is very similar to the smaller backpack. So you will start with the hook at the beginning of the game. This is the angler's hook from the angler boss fight. It is a one-time use. You will never get it again. You only get it at the start of your runs. It's okay. It can win you some games, but it can also be incredibly inconsequential in some games. So it's one of those things that there are better items out there. You'll find yourself sometimes burning that hook early if you specifically need certain items, particularly if you combo these two together. Or these two together, let's say you were doing smaller backpack and you didn't have the hook, so you'd have the hook and you'd have either a squirrel or a pliers. You kind of need to get that hook out early so you can get more items because you don't have the smaller backpack. Putting these two together means you'll always start with squirrel and pliers, and these two synergize really well together if you're planning on going for backpacks or going for pack rat. This is not that big of a challenge. You can avoid this. This to me is the one that I regret playing with this on. I ended up not doing this. This is where you can no longer re-roll your card choices. The clover is an item you have to unlock in the mod, but once you do that, it gives you the ability to re-roll card choices at almost every encounter. You can't re-roll the cave minigame, you can't re-roll boss encounters, the rare card you get from bosses. You can't re-roll the Trapper Trader. But the choose your cost minigame, the choose your card minigame, or the choose your tribe minigame, you can re-roll. This becomes invaluable in certain deck strategies. Certain decks do not want to have other tribes, other blood costs in their deck. Mandatory. This is a very difficult one to run. If you're trying to do a strategy where you're trying to just like beat everything one at a time, like, you know, if you have the basic starter deck and your strategy is I'm going to take the basic starter deck, I'm just going to beat the hardest of these challenges right away and then never run it again, this is the one you want to beat. This one sucks ass to have equipped, because if you get terrible draws, you're kind of screwed. So the next set of 4 that I'm going to cover are these 4 right here. I'm going to cover them as a set of 4. These are pretty easy. Believe it or not, tip scales is very easy to beat. So essentially, if you know from playing the regular game, you need to have 5 more points of damage than Leshy in order to win. What this mod does is instead of it being 5 and 5, it's now 6 and 4. You only get 4 points. Now this changes how you have to play offensively and defensively, but for progressing to later levels, this is a very good one to practice on. It's 20 points, which is one of the higher challenge marks. I almost always ran this as I was working my way through these. This is pretty easy to get used to. One reason it's so easy to get used to is there are certain damage thresholds that you can memorize. If you have a Raven, that is 2 damage, you can upgrade it 1 time and it goes to 3 damage, so you just need 2 hits and you're good. If you have a Direwolf, which is 2 damage, you can upgrade that 1 time, so it's 3 damage a hit. So if you can summon it first turn, you win. Defensively, this becomes more of a problem because you get used to having that 5 points of damage, so that extra point can get you killed a lot of times. Essentially, you have to play a lot more. You either have to lean heavy into defense and tanking hits early into a fight, or you have to lean into massive blowout offense at the start. Next up, you have the boss totem and the all totem. These 2 totems can be relatively difficult, depending on the totem you get more than likely. The boss totem is surprisingly easier because most boss fights become very easy with items, if you have the right items. So my advice is if you are planning on running boss totems, do not run no hook, do not run smaller backpack. These do not synergize that well with boss totem. Essentially, it just makes it to where, you know, it's an extra obstacle at the boss fight. But you're already prepared with a strategy of how to beat the boss. As long as your opening hand is good, as long as you have an item or two, even one item, this is not that difficult. This is very easy to beat. Although you can get some bullshit totems that will completely ruin a run. If you get, like, a Stinky on pretty much any boss. If you get a Stinky on any boss, I'd say Trapper Trader is the worst because everything he summons at the start is reptiles. So if you get a Stinky on Trapper Trader, you can be screwed. But some decks can handle this better than others. The all-totem battle replaces regular battles with totem battles. This essentially means you're trying to avoid combat as much as possible because the random-ass nature of the totem fights gets you killed a lot. This is fine. It's very similar to boss totems in that basically you'll need an item or two, you'll need a really strong deck that can just turbo out damage, or you just need to get lucky on the totem. If you get something like Fly Blocker, the anti-airborne sigil, you're fine. If you get something like Flying Canine Tribe, you're kind of fucked. If Direwolf and Coyote or Alpha Wolf hit the board, you're kind of fucked. So this can be annoying, but it's also kind of RNG based. So as long as you can get through the repetition of just rebuilding your deck, you can get through this pretty easily. I would say that the boss totem is easier than the all totems, because this is one extra difficulty at a boss fight. This is, you can get 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 fights in a single tree just to get to the boss. The last one in this tier I'm going to cover is the no boss rares. This means that boss cards reward regular cards instead of rares. This one is fine. This is actually not that bad. This does take away a few of your options. It becomes very difficult to get certain cards. Irjarak, Hodag, Mothman, these are impossible to get. They're very difficult to get otherwise. But this can be pretty good to run if you're trying to like just stack up points. If you're having difficulty unlocking later challenges, this one right here can be a pretty easy one because you can run this, that's 15, that's 20, puts you at 35, you can run this, that puts you at 40. These three right here give you 40 points that are relatively inconsequential. If you can build around sigils and you can build around campfires, you'll be perfectly fine with the strategy. These two are exactly the same, so I'm not really going to cover it. Basically, it just means that you will get stronger creatures in all your battles. Regular battles, totem battles, boss battles. Stacking one of these is difficult. If you put one of these on by itself, it's perfectly fine. You're not really going to see a difference in gameplay. It's just that, like, Act 1, or the first boss will feel more like the second boss. The second boss will feel more like the third boss. The third boss will feel kind of like the third boss in terms of, like, the path up the tree. Where these cards, if you stack both of these now, you have a problem. Because in both of these, you're essentially never going to see basic cards. Your first fight of the game is going to be as brutal as your last fight of the game before a boss. If you stack one of these with one of the totems, that's fine. It's definitely a bit more challenging. It will make totem battles feel like boss battles. Good strategy, you can get through. If you combine both of these with a totem, you're completely fucked. I would not recommend combining the two of these with a boss. With any type of a totem. Do not combine the two of those with a totem. They are almost unwinnable without random bullshit in your deck. So next up, we have these 4 cards right here. 3 of these cards are absolutely brutal, annoying bullshit. And then there's Squirrelfish, which is fine. Basically, this means that squirrels become waterborne. so they can no longer body block for you. If you're just using squirrels for tribute fodder, you don't care about this at all. If you're specifically running a bone deck where you want squirrels to die to generate bones, avoid this like the plague. Other than that, this is like the Trapper one. You won't even notice this. This is probably the easiest, if not the second easiest mod out of this entire thing to run. That's a free 20 points. These three are a different story. Let's start with the candle. 1 life means no fuck-ups. It also means you are limited to 1 less card in boss fights because you do not get the smoke card. That shorts you 4 bone tokens. That shorts you an extra tribute. It does make boss fights slightly more difficult, but the real problem is that it makes totem fights more difficult. All totem fights become boss fights because where we talked about the totems before, 1 bad totem can ruin you. Here, it ruins the whole run. I've never been able to beat this because I run into the most random bullshit possible. This is probably the single hardest mod to run, in my opinion, out of all of these, because you just can't make a mistake. If you get a bad opening hand, if you get a bad totem RNG, if your items are shit, you essentially lose a whole run. If you misplay 1 card, the run is over. So this is definitely a hard mode to play, but it can be very good if you can master it. I haven't mastered it yet. I'm still running with it. Annoying starters is annoying. That's about it. What this does is it makes it so that the 3 cards in your starter deck, not including the 2 pelts or the possum pelt combo, will always have the annoying sigil, meaning whatever is directly across from it will have 1 extra point of damage. Now, some decks don't care about this. Some decks do. If you are trying to get rid of your starting cards as quickly as possible, then you don't care about this. You can run this, it's perfectly fine. If your starting cards are the key to the survival of your deck, such as the tribute deck with the black goat and the moose, this deck is the bane of your existence. You do not want to run this. You want to go away. This sucks. It can be okay to play around. If you build for hyper offense, this card doesn't matter. If you're building more defensive, this card is the bane of your existence. The last mod we're going to be talking about is the Grizzly Bosses. What this does is, in Act 1, if you try and beat the bosses too early in Act 1, Leshy gets mad and spams 8 grizzlies. They are fly blocker grizzlies, and they are very difficult to out. 4 damage, 6 health. 4 wide. This is not that difficult to beat, believe it or not. There's one problem. You specifically need items. You need the magic bleach to remove the sigils that prevent it from blocking. Then any of your flyers will be fine. If you don't have flyers, then you need the bleach and you need the fan to fly over. That's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is scissors and the trapper pelt, or the trapper's pelt knife. Those 2 combos can straight up win you a fight. The problem is you have to be able to artificially knock out one of those bears, and you can win 1 turn. Grizzly Bosses kind of changes how you play because it makes it to where the hard part is always the second stage of the fight. Now, some bosses, that's not a problem. On, for example, the Prospector, it depends on what your strategy is. Prospector is kind of fine. The Angler is kind of fine, because on the Angler, most of the time, you're going to try that strategy of just flying over anyways. So it just means you need bleach, and you'll be fine. The Trapper Trader is really the one that suffers, because his whole first stage of the boss fight is about setting up the second stage of the boss fight. This kind of removes that. Anyways, so that would be my guide on this. I think this is this is a mid-tier one, but it requires you to play items. This is annoying, but it's fine. This is brutal. This is basic. You can run this anytime. These do not synergize well, so you have to pick and choose which one of these you want. These two are both fine. It's a little bit more of a challenge, but you get used to it, and most of these you can run. The only one I would not run is No Clover. No Clover is the bane of my existence. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to cover is the 8 starter decks, and I'm going to discuss the play style for each of these, or at least a basic play style for each of these. So, the worst of these decks is the one that you unlock last, which is the Curious Egg deck. The way this works is you will get 3 Curious Eggs. Each of these eggs has 3 lines of dots on them. They do absolutely nothing until all 3 of those lines are filled. It is just a 1 bone brick. Can be sacrificed. You can put sigils on it. You can combo it at the Mythologist, and you can kill them at a bone collector. So they do serve uses if you want to get rid of them, or if you want to combo them, or if you just want to put sigils on it. Like if you have a magpie sigil and it's like, I want to just search cards for 1 bone, these are fine for that. If you want to hatch them and use them, that's another story. You need to have a minimum of 5 creatures in your deck. The creatures in your deck, you need to have 1 of each tribe. So that's a insect, bird, hoofed creature, canine, reptile. 1 of those. You need to have 5 cards with a health value of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 5 with a damage range of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And these have to be kept in your deck at all times. If you run the Direwolf Pup, which starts out as a 1/1 creature, and after 1 turn, it evolves into a 2/5 creature. If that is the only 1/1 creature in your deck, the eggs do not hatch. Doesn't work. You have to maintain that value at all times. Otherwise, you can't hatch the egg. So fledglings are out, and it can be very difficult to manipulate these eggs to hatch. You're never going to manipulate these eggs to hatch in your first boss. It's going to be the 2nd or the 3rd at the earliest. So what do you get when you hatch an egg? You get a Hydra. 1 damage, 5 health, hits 5 times. It has Trifork and Bifork. So it will hit the 2 wings, and it will hit all 3. 1 time for 1 damage. They can't be upgraded. You can upgrade the egg, but you can't upgrade the Hydra. The Hydra will always be 1 damage, 5 health. This deck is ass. If you play it the way it's intended, sure it can be fun, sure it can be, a nice challenge. It sucks to play, though, because you're just micromanaging your deck so much. It's easier to try and use the eggs as either tribute fodder, because what you can do is pretty simple. Squirrel into a 1 tribute that gives you the 1 bone that you need to summon this, summon the egg, and then use the egg for a 1 tribute. So you can get 2 1 tributes on the board. Yeah, that's pretty much the best thing you can do with it, or slap a sigil on it. If you want a stinky egg, if you want a magpie egg, if you want a leader egg, for 1 bone, you can get a sigil on the board. Nothing else but a sigil. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. The next weakest deck, in my opinion, is the Bone Collector deck. The Bone Collector deck kind of sucks, similarly to the Curious Egg deck. The 3 cards you start with, you have the Coyote, which is your boss monster, if you will, of the deck, at least early on. You get the Direwolf Pup, and you get the Raccoon. The Raccoon sigil makes it so that enemies, when they die, you get their bones. The Direwolf Pup passively generates bones, and goes, if he can survive 1 turn, he turns into a Direwolf. The main draw to this deck is the Direwolf. If you can get the Direwolf on the field, you win in 2 turns. The Raccoon strategy leads you into more bones, but the downside is you'll have a hard time generating bones, because you need to keep Raccoon and Direwolf on the field. They need blood to get on the field. And if you just draw a bunch of bone-related cards and you don't have Raccoon or Direwolf in your opening hand, you're kind of screwed because you'll have all of these bone cards and nothing to summon them with. So this is one of the few decks that you can't run the Waterborne Squirrels on. You kind of have to play it how it's intended, or you lose. There's no real way to work around it. If you just like the Raccoon and the Direwolf sigils, then feel free to gut the Coyote and just play this however you want, just with a free Raccoon sigil and a free Direwolf pup sigils. The next weakest deck would be the Ant deck, and I would put this in the bottom half. The Ant deck is very strong, but it does require you to lean into its strategy. So the way this deck works is it builds around ants. The Ant Queen is basically a regular worker ant, but when you summon it, it puts a worker ant in your hand. The way ant cards work is every ant that is on your side of the field powers it up. So one ant has 1 power. If you have 2 ants on the field, both ants get 2 power. If you have 3 ants on the field, both ants get 3 power. If you have 4 ants on the field, all 4 ants have 4 power. So if you can turbo out cards pretty quickly, it works. Probably the easiest synergy that this deck has is Cat, Ant, Ant. Easiest trick in the book. Because the ant, at least the flying ant and the worker ant, they're 1 tributes. So Cat and then get 3 ants out for free, basically. 1 squirrel and a cat leads to your other 3 cards. The downside is if you don't have a cat sigil, or getting your Ant Queen out. Ant Queen's really nothing special. The Skunk's not great. The sigil can be good for other cards. But this deck works very well in situations where you can turbo out all 3 ants in 1 turn. If you can't turbo out the ants in 1 turn, you kind of lose. So this has the highest degree of success, but the lowest margin of error out of the 3 decks we covered. Between the Bone deck, which is flexible but has a low payoff, the Curious Egg deck, which is just all over the place, and then this one. These, to me, are the bottom half of the decks. The middle 3 decks are all mid for varying reasons. The bottom of it is the Kraken deck. Kraken deck is 2 Kingfishers, which are kind of shit, but you can kind of make a super flyer deck out of it, and the Great Kraken. Ignore the Kingfisher, let's talk about the Great Kraken. The Great Kraken is a 1 blood card. It hits the field, and it immediately flips at the end of the turn. When it reflips, it will be a random tentacle card. That could be the bell tentacle, the hand tentacle, or the mirror tentacle. The mirror tentacle is the worst of the 3. If you get that, you're kind of fucked. Outside of that, if you get the other 2, it's fine. This deck plays around the Waterborne a lot, so it's a very offensive-minded deck. There is 2 main strategies. One is to build around Great Kraken. Either get the fiduciary, whatever it is, sigil, the field mice sigil on it, so that you play it and you get another Kraken if you don't like your first one, or get the beaver and the dam sigil on it. When you do, what'll happen is the Kraken hits the field, the Kraken flips, the 3 beaver dams will also flip, or the 2 beaver dams on either side will flip with you, and they will respawn as Krakens as well. So you can get 3 Krakens for the price of 1. If you can't do either of those 2 tricks, the Great Kraken is completely useless to you, and you need to completely avoid it like the plague. If that's the case, you build for the Kingfisher strategy, which is just getting a lot of flyers, get a lot of birds, and just go overhead and try and buff them up as much as possible. You have 2 Kingfishers, so put some decent sigil on each one, try and buff them up on damage, and give them to a Mythologist to combo. My winning run in this deck with that specific strategy, I had a 6 damage Kingfisher with a poison sigil on it for blockers, and You just win the run as soon as you can summon it. Not really a lot to say about this deck. It's kind of a gimmick deck. It doesn't work great. Next gimmick deck is the Mantis God. So, Mantis God deck seems pretty terrible. The way it works is you spawn with a Mantis God, which is awesome, and 2 shitty ringworms. Okay. The reason for this is that the intended playstyle is for you to take the ringworms and sacrifice them at the campfire event in order to permanently have the ability to power up the Mantis God at all future bonfires. This requires 2 things. 1, it requires the ringworm to die. If the ringworm doesn't die, you now have either a 5 health, no attack ringworm, or a 2 attack, 1 health ringworm. In either case, the next bonfire you go to, you have a choice. Do you chuck in the second useless ringworm, since your first ringworm is now useful, you just chuck a sigil on it and it's good to go, or do you just try and play it safe with Mantis God? If you chuck the second ringworm in and it doesn't die, you're kind of fucked because you've wasted the opportunity with Mantis God. If you chuck it in and it doesn't die, you now need to play sigils for them. If you chuck it in and it does die, well, now you have to hope you can get more fires along the way, which can kind of change your strategy. Like, if you need items, you have to choose between items and a campfire. That campfire becomes more valuable because you got lucky on the ringworm. This deck took me a few tries to get the RNG on it pretty good with the ringworms. Don't be afraid to keep the ringworms. If a ringworm survives the campfire event, don't chuck it. Keep it. Put a sigil on it. Make it worth your while. There's a lot of sigils out there that these cards turn into awesome cards, particularly if you can supplement Mantis God with something else. The one thing I will say that this deck needs is do not make Mantis God your win condition. You need to have a backup card that can bail you out, because a lot of fights are going to be predicated on, I have Mantis God on the field, I win now, and if it gets taken away from you, you kind of scramble to dig your way out. That's the biggest issue I have with this deck, is there's no backup plan in it. You need to make a backup plan on your own. Also, in case you are wondering, the Mud Turtle's defensive sigil that prevents damage the first time you would take it does not stop bosses from killing your card. It will not stop the steel traps from the Trapper Trader fight. It does not stop the hook from the angler. It does not stop the prospector when he turns it to gold. Doesn't do any of that. So remember that if you go to play this. And the last of these decks that I will cover in this section is the Gek deck. The Gek deck is no cost on your starting 3 cards. The Gek itself, which is a 1/1 card with no sigil and no cost. The Rabbit, basically nothing. It's there for tribute fodder. And the Tadpole, which has no cost. It can't block for the first turn, but it flips down, and on the second turn it comes back as a Bullfrog. So, this deck excels at 2 particular things: Tribute Turbo and Sigil Spam. You absolutely need to do one of 2 things. You need a Magpie Sigil, or you need a Cockroach Sigil. If you can get the Cockroach on the deck, this deck is instant 1 tribute king, because you put a Gek on, you tribute him, you get a Gek in your hand, you put him out, you tribute him. You can load up your entire board in 1 turn with a Cockroach Gek. That 1 sigil can win you this whole deck. My best run with this deck, I had the Cockroach Sigil on the Gek, and I had a Reptile Totem with the Magpie Sigil. So every single time I play Gek or Tadpole, I get to pick a card from my deck. That deck is beyond broken. You're not going to get that deck every time. If you can get anywhere near that deck, you win the fight. You can win almost any fight with it. This deck has the most flexibility and playstyle under 1 singular condition. You have to find boss monsters in the game. You do not start with a boss monster. Unless your strategy is every campfire, chuck the Gek out. It's a fun strategy, but it doesn't always work. So you can play pretty much any type of boss monster you want. If you want 4 tribute Urieli, go right ahead. If you want 3 tributes, if you want high bone cost, go ahead. Just figure out a way to generate it. This deck can work for it. So very accessible, very easy to get into, but no real payoff. You kind of have to build that as you go along the tree. So the 2 best decks, the second best deck is the basic starter deck. The basic starter deck is the most comfortable deck because it has the most options. It is based around blood. It is based around tributes. You have 2 cards with no sigil, so immediately you can just grab 2 decent sigils and just focus on buffing up Stout and Wolf, and there's your win right there. This deck works very well in a low hand environment. So no more than 10 cards in your deck. No more than 8 cards in your deck. This works wonders. Because as long as you can consistently draw into what you want, and as long as you have the cards buffed up enough, it works like a charm. If you get the Wolf with attack range of, say, 5, and you can get a decent sigil, like the Double Strike sigil from a Dire Wolf, or the Flying sigil, that can just outright win you the game in some encounters. Very flexible. Low risk, low reward, though. Because outside of rare situations, this deck doesn't do well. The single best deck in the game is the Tribute deck. So the reason why this deck is the best deck in kaycee's mod is for a game mechanic called Fair Hand Mechanic. What this means is that the game will always spawn you with a card you can play. Unless you don't have one. What this means is, because you always start with a squirrel, the game will always spawn you with a 1 blood card, or pelts, or bones. If you have pelts, this strategy kind of sucks. If you have a lot of bones, this strategy kind of sucks. The way this strategy works is quite simple. You have to get that mole out of your hand as soon as possible. Out of the deck. Take the mole and put it in the campfire and kill it. Or take the mole and put it on the moose buck at a sigil. Well, that's a good strategy because that negates the moose's pushover effect for the most part. So it makes the moose less useless. But the strategy here is very simple. Black goat and nothing but 2 or 3 tribute cards in your deck. You will always open the goat. The only 1 tribute card in your deck needs to be the goat, or, in rare exceptions, the cat. And even then, you want to take the cat sigil and put it on the goat as soon as humanly possible. If you get non-goats that are 1 tribute, you need to get rid of that card before your next fight, or you have a 50-50 chance of just immediately losing the fight. It seems like, oh, that's a terrible deck because I can't run certain cards. No. You don't understand. This deck is the single best deck in the game because this deck essentially allows you to just automatically summon any boss monster. Direwolf, Grizzly, Great White. In some situations, you can get 4 blood tribute that pretty easy. Or a Boris spam. Your strategy is to put a good sigil on your goat. You win the game. It's as simple as that. A good sigil. Don't double your goat up and then go to a mycologist like an asshole. Just put a good sigil on. You're good to go. So this is the rankings for the starter decks. I'm going to put them in order. Tribute deck, starter deck, Gek, Mantis God, Waterborne, Ant, Bone Collector, Curious Egg. And for the cards, go figure out what you like on your own.